Saturday, which is shaping up to be one of the busiest wrestling days of the year. Of course, we have the Great American Bash for NXT. We have AEW All In, and we are also capping that night off with WWE Saturday Night's main event, which will be Goldberg's final match. Fingers crossed, we know how these wrestling retirements look like, right? But tonight we are speaking about the go-home show for AEW All In. The card is looking to be in really good shape. Tickets are moving. It looks as if they have crossed the 20,000 mark. Looks as if they're getting closer and closer to maybe even hitting 25,000, which isn't something that I think should be sneezed at. I know that many people are going to look at the fact that Globe Life Stadium can fit all these more people than 25, but for a company that is less than 10 years old, having a stadium show in the US, I think that it is a win, right? Ask anybody probably less than 10 years ago, do you think any wrestling company outside of WWE would be able to fill in a venue that would be able to sit 10,000 people? I think most of you would say no, right? But we start off the show with Mercedes versus Toni Storm. We end the show with Hangman and Jon Moxley. The two matches that are probably having the most intrigue heading into the show, outside of Kenny Omega versus Okada, which we didn't see these two guys tonight, right? We did not see Kenny Omega. We did not see Okada, but we were able to see this really cool video package that really would make it to where anybody would feel like they want to run through a brick wall watching it. But physically, we did not see the two guys, right? But we start off the show with the CEO and the AEW Women's Champion, Toni Storm. Mercedes Moné opens up the show, and she says, she just wants to have a civil chat with the champion. As we all know, Mercedes Moné is Mercedes' 6 belts right now, and she is looking to be Mercedes' 7 belts, right? So she calls out Toni Storm. At first, we see Toni Storm on the Titantron. We don't see her physically in person. We see Mercedes call her out saying they want to chat. And you see Toni, she says, there's only 2 things that come in Texas, and one of them is me. And Mercedes says, I'm sick of the games. She's like, I want you to sit there and come out. And she calls Toni a total mark, which, hey, is something that I'm sure that I've given called multiple different times. Anybody who's watching this, I'm sure that you have been called that as well, right? So we see Toni Storm come out. Toni Storm, she brings a bottle of champagne. Mercedes drinks it. She says, this champagne is burnt. It feels as if you have been freezing this for a while. Look, I'm not a sommelier, so I'm not the expert when it comes to freezing champagne, but I guess you could tell a difference in the taste, right? Who knew, right? Then you see them toast, and you see them toast to Mercedes becoming the next AEW Women's Champion. And you see Toni and her go back and forth. Obviously, these are 2 women who had very high-profile stints in WWE. I feel as if it's pretty obvious that Mercedes' stint in WWE went a lot better than Toni Storm's stint in WWE. As we all know, we remember that infamous moment where we saw Toni Storm be pie-faced. Mercedes Moné was at least able to say that she main evented a night of WrestleMania, which she did with Bianca Belair. But these are 2 people who have very similar, paths, but have become very different in the way that they have approached their stint in AEW, right? Mercedes, she gets called out by Toni Storm. Toni says, you're not real, you're fake, you lack depth. And all these titles that you have is kind of a mask, and you deserve all these titles that you have, just not my title, right? And then you see them do a toast at the end of it because they're agreeing that they're going to put on this match. And then you see Toni Storm tell Mercedes to eat shit, bitch. They brawl. Mercedes does the moonwalk out of the ring, and we end this segment with Toni Storm standing tall. Now, for me, just with my experience as a wrestling fan, that is a death sentence for whoever is standing tall when it goes to going into the pay-per-view and you're the opponent, right? That's always the death sentence. It always means, like, if you're the one who's left standing tall heading into the show, you're probably going to lose. But I think it's gotten to a point where Mercedes has to lose this title or have to lose this match just to add depth, right? I feel to depth to her character, because I feel like we've done so much we possibly can with this Mercedes undefeated streak that's like, it's time for us to give Toni Storm that win, because although Toni Storm is probably the most interesting character on the whole show outside of Hangman, Mercedes is obviously the bigger star when it comes to crossover appeal. So I think that giving Toni this win will put a stamp on it. It will really sit there and signify that she is the one who is running the roost when it comes to the women's division. So personally, for me, I think Toni's going to win. I think it's always good to maybe have somebody who's a younger star pick up a win against Mercedes. I think that maybe a Queen Aminata, who's obviously somebody who's getting a lot of fanfare over the momentum that she's carried on a weekly basis, with what she's been able to do on Collision. I think that she would be also a fine choice if they want to go to the route of having Mercedes, capture the title at All In. But I'm going with Toni Storm heading into the show, right? Next, we get this backstage segment with the Mox hyping up what they're going to do at All In. It says, I've been thinking, and the fact that we've had this Texas death match in the past, I know that you were able to beat me that one time, but that was just a battle and not the war. I've never lost a war. And he goes on to speak about how is Hangman going to be able to withstand the pressure going into All In, carrying this burden of what it takes to be the AEW champion. Very similar to the promo that he caught last week against Hangman. So we kind of got a repeat of the same thing. Guys, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't. It really helps the channel out in more ways than you even know. We're inching closer and closer to 3,000 subs. We're already at a little bit over 26,000. That's 26,000. 2,600. Obviously, I'm not a mathematician when I fuck that up, right? But we're getting closer and closer. So be a part of the uprise when it comes to helping the channel out reach goals that we started from the beginning. Next, we get into a match between Bandito tagging up with Brody King against the Don Callis family, Kyle Fletcher and Takeshita. As you guys may not know, or if you do know, Takeshita will be going one-on-one with Bandito for the ROH Championship at Final Battle on Friday. I might cover that event too. It's going to be a long weekend, man, because I know I got to watch SmackDown too. It's going to be an insane weekend, bell to bell, watching wrestling, right? But obviously Brody King, with the size that he has and his athletic ability, he's been able to become a fan favorite over the last several months and several weeks especially. He's somebody who's really been able to, connect with the fans on a more, frequent basis. Bandito, Takeshita, they worked here, and then at the end of the day, we were able to see the Don Callis family pick up the W. We saw Takeshita pick up a pin against Bandito, hyping up more and enhancing the story they have leading into Final Battle. I think Takeshita should be the guy to win the ROH title, because Takeshita is somebody who obviously has a bright future. Guys like Bryan Danielson requested to work with him. Kenny Omega obviously had two really good matches with him where we saw Takeshita pick up the W in both instances. He's somebody who's really going to be making his mark in this business. He's already signed with all these different promotions. So he's a very wanted man, not just in AEW, but all around the world at the moment. I think we're going to see Takeshita pick up the win then. Next, see a backstage segment with FTR and Christian Cage and the Patriarchy. Obviously, Christian Cage is a part of that three-way for the AEW Tag Team Championships with the Hurt Syndicate and Jet Speed. FTR, they're not involved. But we see a segment where, as you guys may not know, Collision is going to be on Thursday, tomorrow, and they are going to be involved in an 8-man tag match. And basically, Christian is talking about glazing FTR for the most part, speaking about how great of a tag team they are, mentioning the fact that they are a 10-time tag team champion. And he says, after what goes down on Collision tomorrow, if you guys could scratch our back when it comes to All In, then we'll scratch your back. And we see basically Stokely speak on behalf of FTR and says, let's just get through Collision tomorrow. And we are going to be at All In, but let's just get through tomorrow and we're going to see what happens, right? And then we see Stokely force Christian Cage to shake his hand. Next, we get Ricochet, the Bald Wonder, going one-on-one with Vanilla Baby, Blake Christian. I know there's been this push lately to have Blake Christian come out to Jack Harlow. We saw him talk about it earlier today, speaking how it's on Tony Khan's radar. I think that would be a match made in heaven. Vanilla Baby Blake Christian coming out to Jack Harlow makes the most sense. Now, if you're not very familiar with Blake Christian, I know that he has been used amazingly as enhancement talent on Dynamite. You've seen him make his appearances on Ring of Honor and Collision. But if you're just exposed to him on Dynamite, obviously in your mind, you're probably thinking this guy is probably just a jobber, but he was really able to come out and showcase what he's able to do tonight. This was a lot more of a competitive match that we're used to seeing him on Dynamite, and there was a really cool spot where we saw the Gates of Agony come out because, Ricochet and the Gates of Agony, they're clicking up, they're becoming this group. We see them being on Ricochet's side when it comes to the ring side. And we see Blake Christian use these two guys as hurdles, but at the end of the night, it was too much. Bald Rico picked up the W against the Vanilla Baby, and the Gates of Agony gave Blake Christian a little bit of the beats, just a little bit of the beats after that match. Ricochet is in the Battle Royal Gauntlet at All In. I'm excited for that match. Obviously, we're going to have, the segment that was hyped up for the most part heading into this week was, the talkie talk between Mark Briscoe and MJF. They're going to be starting off the match, but we usually see a couple of maybe debuts, a little bit of a surprise. Last year, we saw Ricochet make his the AEW debut in that match, and we saw the return of Nigel McGuinness. So we never know what we're going to be able to see coming into that show. Next, we get this backstage interview with Renee Paquette and MJF in the Hurt Syndicate. MJF is speaking about hyping up the talkie talk segment that he's about to go in with Mark Briscoe. And he goes on to talk about how his goal is, which is something that he's talked about multiple different times, is to recapture his Triple B, right? He's flanked by the Hurt Syndicate, but they tell MJF, like, hey, we got this photo shoot with the tag team titles, we'll be back, right? Then they head into this little back room area, which is, I guess, would be their locker room. And they see on a whiteboard written, and it says, we took your titles, basically, because we're going to be getting them at All In, so we already took it early, right? Never seen the Syndicate get the beats. They did get a nice little case of the beats, right? So they leave MJF on his own, right? So it's going to be truly one-on-one, him and Mark Briscoe for this talkie talk segment, right? Talkie talk, right? MJF comes out, Mark Briscoe comes out. MJF is getting the tiny pickle chants throughout the whole crowd. You see MJF trying not to acknowledge it, but we see Mark Briscoe acknowledge it because we all knew he would, right? Then we see MJF come out and basically bury the whole talkie talk phrase. He says the dumbest shit he's ever heard. He calls Mark Briscoe, a redneck and a hick and all these different things. He starts speaking in a stereotypical Southern accent, burying him in Texas, which is the heart of the South, right? Something up the direct. And then he says the famous Roddy Piper phrase, you don't throw rocks at a man with a machine gun, right? In this segment, we all know what was going to go down, right? We all knew at some point when it comes to MJF, he always tries to go below the belt. When it comes to these very personal segments, he's very famous for them. We remember his feud with CM Punk, obviously his feud with Jon Moxley, his feud with Hangman Page. He's not afraid to go into the areas where most people don't go. And obviously he was going to bring up the unfortunate passing of Jay Briscoe to Mark Briscoe, but he didn't go the route that we thought we would go, or we would hear him, right? He goes on to praise Jay Briscoe, talk about how he's going to go down as one of the best wrestlers of all time. Obviously, the Briscoes are probably in the conversation for the best tag team, at least for the last decade, there with FTR and the Bucks or the Usos, whoever you fancy as your favorite tag team of the past decade. The Briscoes are in there. But he says, what's really unfortunate about his passing is the fact that he's up there. He's probably, rolling in his grave, seeing what Mark Briscoe has become. He's become this joke, this laughing stock. Many people don't think him as one half of the best tag team championships of all time. And he says, if he could hear Jay Briscoe talking now, he would tell Mark, he's like, I shouldn't have passed away in that accident. It should have been you. Obviously, that sets up Mark Briscoe to be extremely fired up when he heard that. And we see them brawl. We see the Hurt Syndicate come out, attempt to make the save, but they were jacked and beat by the Jet Speed, right? Kevin Knight and Mike Bailey, two guys who are very much smaller than the Hurt Syndicate. Then we see the Patriarchy get involved in the beats. And we see Christian hit Bobby Lashley and Shelton Benjamin with multiple different concertos on their legs. We see Christian, that dastardly snake, be able to take advantage like a vulture, right? Like a vulture, pick the scraps after what we saw go down with Jet Speed. And it's setting up for an interesting match. I know that heading into this, for the last several months, it was rumored that we were going to get that, Adam Copeland and Christian Cage reunion. Obviously, that's not in the cards. We heard that the other week that Christian said, he really wanted to finish up the storyline with Nick Wayne. That's a true veteran, right? Looking out for the next generation, because although it would be cool to see, Captain Charisma and, Adam Copeland back together one more again, but it doesn't really benefit those guys unless they're going to be, taking pins against the young guys, right? So it was nice to see that Christian was looking out for him. Captain Charisma is a Canadian treasure that the United States does not deserve. He's in the debate for greatest Canadian, right? When it comes to wrestling, right? He's probably not going to make the Mount Rushmore, because I'd assume the Mount Rushmore is what? Brett, Owen. Shit. There's a lot of great Canadian wrestlers, right? There's going to be somebody who's going to be left out. I would go with Omega, and I'd probably go with Edge. But Kevin Owens is in that discussion. Christian is in that discussion. Chris Jericho is in that discussion. There's a lot of different people. A lot of great Canadian wrestlers, right? Next, we get into the four-way with the women. This is to gain the number 2 spot in the gauntlet match for them. We have Megan Bayne, Tekla, Ty Mello, and Queen Emanata. If you guys aren't familiar or don't watch Collision on a weekly basis, Tekla and Queen Emanata have really been going at it for the last several weeks. I think it'd be nice to see these two ladies go and have a best of 7, but I'm a glutton for good graps, so I'd be down for that. Not so much other people. But throughout this match, we see them, Dino Bravo work there as well. Is he better than Kenny Omega, though, Pops? I don't know. I don't think he's better than Kenny Omega. But throughout this match, we see the theme of Tekla and Queen Emanata going at it. And once this match was wrapped up, we saw them going at it at the back. We see Megan Bayne pick up the W, which I think was the obvious choice. She's going to be in there with Chris Statlander starting up the match. Now, that's going to be good, right? 2 strong, beefy women starting up this match. I'd like to see a surprise in the women's gauntlet match. You know, last year we saw the surprises with Nigel McGuinness and Ricochet. I like to see them make a surprise with the women. I'm pretty sure all like the legendary women that you would want to see, somebody like Lita or individuals like that are locked up with WWE, but they could pull something out, right? Next, we see Samoa Joe versus Wheeler Yuta. Obviously, going into it, there's a huge size disadvantage when it comes to Yuta and Samoa Joe. But Yuta was able to pick and have a good fight against Joe. It wasn't as one-sided as you would think it would be, but at the end of the day, Samoa Joe was able to choke Wheeler out. But he got some help from New Japan's Gabe Kidd, who is this mercenary for the Death Riders. Not a Death Rider, but a Death Rider friend. But the Ops were able to make the save, Shibata and Will Hobbs, which was able to lead into the main event tonight, right? The all-star tag team match. We've got a lot of these all-star multi-person tag team matches, right? We got one last week. We got one on Collision with the women. We're getting a lot of these how many all-stars do you have, right? Loving your reviews, bro. Appreciate it, man. Appreciate it. What's up, Carson? Appreciate it. But before we get to that, right? Going into this PLE, I'm being WWE trained, right? Going into this pay-per-view, the women have multiple matches, right? Which is good, which is something that we have been hearing, a lot of complaints. I like how you're not biased towards either promotion. I don't think that any sensible content creator when it comes to wrestling can be biased, right? There's things I like in AEW. There's things I don't like in AEW. There's things I like in WWE. There's things I don't like. I don't think that you can be able to pick a side, especially in this business, right? Only if you're going to just cover one specific company, which I think is kind of boring, right? But no, I call the things out the way I call it. If I see something I don't like in either company, I'm not afraid to call it out. If I see something I like in both companies, I try to praise them equally, right? Because I think people can see through that for the most part. if you're biased. So I try not to be biased, right? But heading into this multi-person match, obviously the main story that we're going to hear and it's going to be played out is going to be what's going to go down in the main event of All In, right? The stuff that's going down between the Death Riders and Jon Moxley against Hangman Page and Swerve Strickland and Will Ospreay, right? Two high-stake matches. I'm looking forward to both of them. I think that we're going to be in for really good graphs when it comes to those guys, but heading into this, we all know the side story that's going on with Hangman and the Bucks. Three individuals who've had multiple years of history, whether it's fighting on the same side or fighting against each other. And throughout this whole match, we saw multiple different occasions where Hangman was trying his best to best the Bucks, but with the numbers disadvantage, obviously Hangman wasn't going to be in a position to really fight them off for so long, right? But there was chaos throughout this match. There's times where it was organized, where we saw multiple guys, going into it. We saw Claudio interact with Samoa Joe. We saw Will Ospreay interact with the Bucks. But there was points in it where it was just all hell breaking loose, right? Mox brings out the table that was going to be in play later on. We see that being in play where we saw Will Ospreay go through it, where we had Claudio and Jon Moxley put him through it, right? And at the end, we were able to see Jon Moxley choke out Shibata, which we all kind of knew that if the Death Riders were going to win, Shibata was unfortunately going to be the person who took the loss, right? Then we see Hangman kind of be cornered by himself because all the other baby faces are dealing with other things throughout the match. But Will Ospreay was able to go in there and try to make the save, but he wasn't able to do it. They were outnumbered. We looked as if we were going to get the same spot that we saw at Wrestle Dream where they choked out Bryan Danielson and put the plastic bag over his head. Before we were able to see that, we saw on the screen Swerve Strickland. He was in kind of one of those claw machines. I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. I'm not good and an expert when it comes to my construction equipment, but you guys all know that crane machine that that picks up the dirt, right? He's sitting there and he brings up, his past with the Bucks and their match heading into All In. All of this is for power, right? And then we see a widescreen shot. We see the Bucks' limo right there. And then we see Swerve sit there and carve up the limo with the machine, right? Very reminiscent of, like you said, Salty Gravy, very reminiscent of Steve Austin. Guys, before I get any further, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't. Hitting the like button helps a lot, and subbing helps a lot as well if you haven't done it. We're getting closer and closer to 3,000. We're over 2,600 subs. Closer and closer. May not be today, may not be the number, may not be tomorrow, but we're getting closer and closer, right? But everything is going the way it's supposed to go. We see the Bucks go out there and try to see their limo after it's been destroyed multiple different times. They go out there, they see Prince Nana. He was a distraction. We're thoughts on the upcoming show. With that show, you know what I'm interested about that show? I think that we're all at the point where we know wrestling is entertainment, right? Like we all know it's not a legitimate sport. I don't think I'm bursting anybody's bubble with that. But from a fan's perspective, it kind of sits there and makes me feel strange where you guys are, if you saw that press conference after the Elimination Chamber, right? When John Cena turned heel, and it was this big shocking moment that everybody, was really like gobsmacked by. I always find it kind of strange that immediately after we see this emotional moment where people are just, their jaws on the ground, we see The Rock come out and basically, say, yeah, this was all a show. Yeah, this isn't real. Yeah, we thought about this for a little bit. And then we did that interview with Pat McAfee, basically spoiling things that they had planned, within the next several months. Where they're talking about, yeah, we're thinking about turning Cody Rhodes heel, but, Triple H signature John Cena. And said, it's like seeing how the sausage is made, right? But like immediately after like eating a sausage, pause. And it's strange. So I'm going to watch the show, on Netflix because I feel like, I want to kind of just talk about something different, right? We talk about the in-ring show on a weekly basis so often that's like it's kind of something that's off the beaten path where I think it'd be a little bit more interesting to talk to. I think people would want to give their opinions on, but it's just strange, telling me it's fake after just after I saw it, right? But I'm gonna catch the show. I'm gonna catch the show, and I'll let you know what I feel about it. But I'm gonna watch the show. Yeah, we're gonna watch the show, right? I feel like we're gonna watch the show. It's no problem. I'm not taking this protest where I'm saying, "Hey, you're telling me it's fake." After I just no, we're gonna watch the show, right? It's going to be an interesting weekend, though. But the show, I thought this was a very solid go home show. I feel as if you're at the point, like if you're going to buy all in, I don't know if this show was going to get it to where, like, if you're undecided, or it's going to get you to buy it or not. But we're going to go live following the show. It's going to be a long day because immediately following that is Saturday night's main event, right? So it's going to be a long day of wrestling, and then the next day will be Evolution, which I'll be going live immediately following Evolution as well. Probably won't go live after Saturday night's main event. We'll just do a standalone video because that's a lot of time to go live, right? But it's going to be a good day, long day, NXT, All In, Saturday night's main event, Evolution. It's going to be a long weekend when it comes to professional wrestling, and we are going to be able to talk about it as much as you guys want that weekend. There'll be a lot of coverage, whether it's shorts, whether it's standalone videos, and of course the lives. Like I said, guys, I'll be covering it as much as I possibly can. Always remember, I am just one man. But like I said, guys, before I get out of here, please hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't. Helps the channel out in more ways than you even know. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. It's a long show. And remember, Collision is tomorrow. It's not Saturday. It's tomorrow. So if anything goes down worth talking about it, you'll see some coverage going down based off of what went down on Collision, guys. Signing out, Kevin Zwicker. I'm out.